Cold rain fell over the lower streets of New Carthage City. Neon lights reflected across dirty water as thousands of people hurried through the crowded roads without looking at each other. Giant screens above the buildings repeated the same warning every few minutes. Stay away from unknown alien species. Report all suspicious contact immediately. Most citizens ignored the message because they heard it every day, but near a dark alley behind the market district, a small figure lay shaking beside a pile of broken cargo crates. Nobody stopped walking. Nobody wanted trouble. The little alien girl could not have been older than 8 years old. Her thin body was covered with cuts and bruises, and one of her legs bent in a painful, unnatural way. Soft blue skin glowed faintly under the rain, while wet white hair stuck to her frightened face. Her huge silver eyes searched the streets desperately, hoping someone would help her. Every time she tried to move, pain forced her back into the cold puddles. She reached her tiny hand toward passing strangers, but people quickly stepped away as if she carried death itself. 2 city workers stopped nearby for a moment before one of them cursed quietly under his breath. He warned his friend not to get close because the alien child might belong to one of the infected outer colonies. The other worker looked nervous and immediately backed away. Within seconds, both men disappeared into the rain again. A group of teenagers noticed the injured girl and started recording her with their phones while laughing cruelly. One of them tossed an empty drink container near her face. The child flinched in fear and curled against the wall silently, trying not to cry. Not far away, a tall human mechanic named Elias Ward stepped out of a repair garage after finishing a 16-hour shift. His jacket smelled of machine oil, and exhaustion covered his face. Life in the lower city had never been easy for him. Most days he worked until midnight just to pay rent for his tiny apartment. As Elias walked toward the train station, he noticed a crowd staring toward the alley. At first, he planned to ignore it like everyone else. In New Carthage, people survived by avoiding problems. But then he heard a weak, painful sound coming from the shadows. Elias slowly moved closer and finally saw the alien child lying in the rainwater. For a long moment, he simply stared at her. She looked less like a monster and more like a terrified, injured animal abandoned by the world. Her body trembled violently from cold and fear. When their eyes met, the little girl tried to crawl backward even though she could barely move. She expected him to hurt her like the others. Instead, Elias quietly removed his gloves and knelt beside her without speaking. The crowd behind him immediately began whispering nervously. A security drone floated above the alley and scanned the child with a bright red light. Seconds later, 2 armed city officers pushed through the crowd. One officer shouted at Elias to step away immediately. He explained that the alien species was considered dangerous until properly identified by the government. The officer warned him that helping illegal aliens could lead to arrest or quarantine. People nearby nodded in agreement, happy someone was finally handling the situation. But Elias kept looking at the child's frightened eyes instead of listening to the threats around him. The little alien suddenly tried to lift her shaking hand toward Elias before collapsing weakly against the wall again. He noticed deep burn marks across her arms and fresh blood mixing with rainwater beneath her broken leg. Whatever happened to her had been violent. Elias remembered stories about war refugees arriving secretly from outer colonies after pirate attacks. Most citizens treated them like unwanted animals. For the first time in years, anger slowly grew inside him. He could not understand how dozens of people walked past an injured child without helping once. One officer grabbed Elias by the shoulder and warned him for the final time. "If you touch that thing, you deal with the consequences alone." The crowd watched silently, waiting to see what he would do. Rain continued pouring from the dark sky while thunder echoed between the giant buildings overhead. Elias looked down at the tiny alien girl one more time. Her silver eyes were slowly closing as if she no longer had strength left to fight. Without another word, Elias removed his heavy coat and carefully wrapped it around her trembling body. Then, to everyone's shock, he gently lifted the injured child into his arms. The entire alley became silent. Even the officers froze in disbelief as Elias carried the alien girl away from the crowd and walked into the rainy night. High above the streets, hidden figures watched from the rooftops through glowing scopes. One of them quietly spoke into a communicator. "The human has the child," the voice whispered. "Follow him. Rain continued falling across New Carthage while Elias carried the unconscious alien child through the empty industrial streets. People stopped and stared as he passed beneath the glowing neon signs. Some whispered insults while others quickly moved out of his way in fear. Elias ignored all of them and kept walking toward the old apartment district near the cargo rail lines. The little girl felt dangerously cold in his arms, and her weak breathing worried him more every minute. By the time he finally reached his building, his clothes were completely soaked from the storm. Elias lived on the 4th floor of a broken apartment block filled with factory workers and poor refugees. The old elevator stopped working years ago, so he climbed the dark metal stairs carefully while carrying the child. A few neighbors opened their doors to watch him pass through the hallway. One old woman gasped when she saw the alien girl wrapped inside his coat. Another neighbor quietly warned Elias that the building manager would never allow aliens inside. Elias said nothing. He unlocked his apartment door and quickly stepped inside before more questions followed him. The apartment was tiny and messy, filled with old machine parts, repair tools, and half-finished engineering projects. A small heater buzzed weakly in the corner while city lights flickered through cracked windows. Elias gently placed the child onto his old couch and finally got a better look at her injuries. Her left leg was swollen badly, and strange glowing cuts covered both of her arms. Small bruises marked her neck as if someone had grabbed her violently. Even worse, she looked severely underfed. Elias quietly muttered to himself, wondering how long she had been alone. He brought warm water, clean cloth, and an old medical kit from the bathroom cabinet. At first he moved carefully, unsure if the child might panic when she woke up. But when he touched her forehead, he realized she was burning with fever. Elias carefully cleaned the dirt and blood from her wounds while the storm rumbled outside the apartment. The glowing marks on her skin became clearer beneath the light. Thin silver lines moved across her arms like strange living symbols. Elias had never seen anything like them before. Several hours later, the alien girl suddenly opened her eyes in panic. She immediately tried crawling away from the couch despite her injured leg. Fear filled her silver eyes as she pressed herself into the far corner of the room. Elias slowly stepped back to avoid frightening her more. The child looked around desperately, searching for an escape route. When she noticed the locked windows and door, her breathing became faster. She grabbed a broken metal pipe lying near the wall and held it toward Elias with trembling hands. Elias raised both hands calmly to show he meant no harm. He slowly placed a plate of warm food and a bottle of water onto the table between them before stepping away again. The child stared at the food suspiciously for several long seconds. Her small body shook from exhaustion, but hunger finally defeated fear. She lowered the pipe carefully and moved closer to the table. Instead of eating normally, she grabbed pieces quickly as if someone might steal the food away at any second. Elias watched silently, realizing she had probably survived alone for a very long time. After finishing the meal, the little alien quietly studied Elias from across the room. She still looked terrified, but confusion slowly replaced some of the fear in her eyes. Humans had hurt her before. Humans had ignored her suffering in the streets. Yet somehow this stranger had carried her home instead. Elias pointed toward himself slowly. "Elias," he said in a calm voice. Then he pointed toward her gently, asking for her name. The child hesitated for a moment before speaking softly in broken human language. "Litra." Her voice sounded weak and careful, almost unused to speaking. Elias smiled slightly and repeated her name so she knew he understood. For the first time since arriving, the child relaxed a little. But before either of them could speak again, the apartment lights suddenly flickered. A loud mechanical sound echoed outside the building windows. Elias quickly moved toward the glass and looked down into the rainy street below. 3 black armored vehicles had stopped outside the apartment complex. Men wearing dark combat armor stepped into the rain carrying advanced rifles. Red scanning lights moved slowly across the building walls, while nearby civilians hurried away in fear. Elias felt his stomach tighten immediately. These were not normal city police. Behind him, Lyra suddenly froze in terror. Her silver eyes widened as she stared at the armored soldiers below. Then she whispered one trembling word that sent cold fear through the apartment. "Hunters." The moment Lyra whispered the word "hunters," the entire atmosphere inside the apartment changed. Fear spread across her small face so quickly that Elias immediately understood these people were far more dangerous than normal soldiers. The little alien backed away from the window and pressed herself against the wall while trembling uncontrollably. Outside, heavy rain crashed against the street as the armored men continued scanning the building with red searchlights. Their black vehicles carried no city symbols or government marks. Whoever they were, they wanted to stay invisible. Elias quickly turned off the apartment lights and pulled the curtains closed. His mind raced as he searched for a plan. He had already spent most of his life avoiding trouble, but somehow trouble had now followed him home. Down below, one of the armored soldiers pointed toward the apartment building entrance while another activated a floating surveillance drone. The machine rose slowly into the air like a metal insect and began scanning each floor window one by one. Elias realized they were searching carefully, not randomly. They already knew Lyra was somewhere nearby. Lyra suddenly grabbed Elias's sleeve tightly with her small, shaking hands. Her silver eyes were filled with panic. "Must hide," she whispered brokenly. "Hunters take Lyra. Hurt many." Elias knelt beside her and tried speaking calmly, even though tension filled his chest. He asked who these hunters really were, but Lyra struggled to explain in human language. She pointed toward the glowing marks on her arm, and then toward the soldiers outside. "Bad people," she said quietly. "Always chase. Always kill." The fear in her voice sounded painfully real. A loud knock suddenly echoed through the apartment hallway. Elias immediately stood up while Lyra hid behind the couch. Another heavy knock followed, this time stronger than before. Someone outside was checking doors floor by floor. Elias looked around his tiny apartment desperately, knowing there was almost nowhere to hide. He quickly moved old machine crates away from a storage closet near the kitchen and signaled Lyra to stay inside silently. The child crawled into the dark space while holding her injured leg painfully. Before closing the door, Elias handed her a small flashlight and quietly promised he would protect her. The knocking finally reached his apartment door. "Open immediately," a cold voice ordered from outside. Elias took a deep breath and slowly unlocked the door. 3 armored men stood in the hallway with rifles hanging beside their shoulders. Their leader wore a dark helmet with glowing red lenses covering his eyes. Behind them, frightened neighbors peeked through half-open doors before quickly hiding again. The leader stepped inside without waiting for permission and began scanning the apartment carefully. "We are searching for an illegal alien refugee," he said calmly. "Reports say you were seen carrying one through Sector 12. Elias forced himself to remain calm despite the danger surrounding him. He lied and claimed the officers in the street must have mistaken someone else for him. The armored leader stared at Elias silently for several long seconds, almost as if trying to read his thoughts. Then the soldier activated a handheld scanner. Blue light moved slowly across the apartment walls, furniture, and floor. Elias realized with horror that the device was searching for alien biological signals. Inside the hidden closet, Lyra covered her mouth with both hands to stop herself from breathing loudly. Suddenly, the scanner beeped once. The soldier's head turned slowly toward the kitchen. Every muscle in Elias's body tightened instantly. One of the armed men raised his rifle while another began moving toward the storage closet. For a brief second, Elias considered fighting them, even though he knew he would lose. But before the soldiers reached the kitchen, screams suddenly echoed from outside the building. Explosions burst somewhere near the lower streets, shaking the apartment windows violently. The armored men immediately stopped moving as emergency alarms spread across the district below. One soldier spoke urgently through a communicator. "Unknown attack near the western checkpoint," he reported. "Possible resistance ambush." The leader cursed under his breath before turning back toward Elias. "We'll return," he warned coldly. "If you are hiding the child, your death will be slow." Then the armored group quickly left the apartment and disappeared down the hallway stairs. Seconds later, Elias heard their vehicles speeding away through the rain outside. For several moments, the apartment remained completely silent except for distant sirens echoing across the city. Elias slowly opened the storage closet door. Lyra crawled out weakly, still shaking with fear. Tears quietly rolled down her face as she looked toward the window. "They always find Lyra," she whispered softly. Elias was about to comfort her when he noticed something strange outside. Far across the rooftops, a hooded figure stood watching the apartment from the rain. The stranger remained motionless for only a few seconds before disappearing into the darkness. But before vanishing, the figure left behind one terrifying message painted across a nearby wall in glowing red symbols. Return the child, or the city burns. The glowing red message outside the apartment building remained burned into Elias's mind the entire night. Rain continued falling over New Carthage, while distant sirens echoed through the lower districts. Elias locked every window and turned off the apartment lights, but sleep never came. Lyra sat quietly near the couch with a blanket wrapped around her fragile body. Every loud sound from outside made her flinch nervously. She looked less like a dangerous alien refugee, and more like a frightened child waiting for the world to hurt her again. By morning, news of the mysterious explosions had spread across the city. Large security drones hovered between buildings while armored patrols blocked several streets below. Giant screens warned citizens about terrorist activity connected to illegal alien movement. Elias immediately understood the hunters were controlling the story. If they returned to the apartment, neither he nor Lyra would survive. He quickly packed a small travel bag with food, medicine, repair tools, and extra batteries. The moment Lyra saw the bag, she understood they were leaving. Fear filled her silver eyes once again. Elias knelt beside her and explained they needed to move somewhere safer. Lyra hesitated quietly before asking a question in broken human language. "Why help, Lyra?" she whispered softly. "Humans hate my kind." Elias paused for several seconds because even he did not fully know the answer himself. Maybe he simply could not ignore a suffering child. Maybe he was tired of living in a world where kindness disappeared. Finally, he looked at her calmly and answered with simple honesty. "Because leaving you there would have been wrong." For the first time since meeting him, Lyra's frightened expression softened slightly. The two quietly escaped through the building's maintenance stairwell before sunrise. Elias avoided the main streets carefully while guiding Lyra through narrow industrial alleys behind abandoned factories. Her injured leg slowed them down badly, so Elias often carried her whenever the pain became too much. The lower city already felt dangerous enough, but today the atmosphere was worse. Armed checkpoints stood on nearly every corner, and surveillance drones moved constantly overhead. Several giant screens now displayed a blurry security image of Elias carrying Lyra through the rain the previous night. "Report immediately," the warning repeated across every district. Elias knew they could not stay above ground much longer. After several hours of avoiding patrols, he finally led Lyra toward an old subway entrance hidden beneath a collapsed cargo station. Rust covered the broken metal doors, while dirty water dripped endlessly from cracked ceilings. Few citizens ever entered the underground tunnels anymore because gangs and smugglers controlled most of the abandoned transit system. But Elias knew the hidden tunnels better than most people. Years ago, he used them while transporting illegal machine parts between districts for extra money. As they descended deeper underground, the noise of the city slowly faded behind them. Flickering emergency lights cast long shadows across old train tracks covered in dust and rust. Strange symbols painted across tunnel walls warned travelers to stay away from gang territory. Lyra stayed close beside Elias while nervously watching every dark corner around them. Occasionally, distant voices echoed somewhere deeper inside the tunnels, followed by the sounds of metal doors slamming shut. The underground city felt like another world hidden beneath New Carthage. After several hours of walking, they finally reached an old refugee settlement built inside a forgotten subway station. Hundreds of poor families lived there among broken train cars converted into homes. Humans and aliens mixed together carefully, while merchants sold stolen supplies beneath hanging electric lamps. Some people stared suspiciously at Elias and Lyra, but nobody called security. Down here, survival mattered more than species. Elias relaxed slightly for the first time all day. At least the hunters would have difficulty searching such a crowded underground maze. A tall woman named Mara approached Elias from behind a supply stand, filled with mechanical parts. She had once worked with him during cargo transport years earlier. The moment she noticed Lyra, concern filled her face. Elias quietly explained that dangerous people were chasing the child. Mara immediately led them toward a hidden storage room beneath the station. "You picked a terrible time to bring trouble down here," she warned quietly. "Armed strangers have been searching the tunnels since sunrise." Inside the hidden room, Elias finally cleaned Lyra's injured leg properly. The child winced painfully but stayed silent while he worked. As he wrapped fresh bandages around her wounds, Lyra suddenly looked toward him carefully. "Home," she whispered slowly, while pointing around the small room. Elias frowned slightly, unsure what she meant. Lyra pointed toward him this time. "Elias, home." The simple words hit him harder than expected. Nobody had depended on him in many years. Yet somehow this small alien child already trusted him completely. Before Elias could respond, loud shouting suddenly erupted somewhere outside the station. People began running through the tunnels in panic while warning sirens echoed underground. Mara rushed into the room looking pale and frightened. "They found us," she said quickly. "The hunters are already inside the station." Then the underground lights suddenly shut off. Darkness swallowed the entire tunnel system. And somewhere within the shadows, heavy armored footsteps slowly began moving closer. Darkness swallowed the underground station completely after the power failed. Panic spread through the refugee tunnels as frightened families rushed through the narrow corridors carrying bags, children, and supplies. Emergency alarms echoed through the station while distant gunfire exploded somewhere above the tracks. Elias immediately grabbed Lyra's hand and pulled her deeper into the hidden storage room. Her small fingers trembled violently in his grip. Even without light, he could feel the fear running through her body like ice. Outside, heavy armored footsteps slowly moved through the station. The hunters were searching carefully now, checking every room and tunnel one by one. Flashlights swept across the darkness while terrified refugees hid behind broken train cars and metal barricades. Elias quickly turned off the small lantern inside the room and blocked the door using heavy supply crates. Mara loaded energy rounds into an old plasma rifle while muttering nervous curses under her breath. "Those monsters aren't normal mercenaries," she whispered. "People disappear whenever they show up." Lyra suddenly grabbed her head in pain and collapsed onto her knees. Soft silver light began glowing beneath the skin of her arms again. The strange symbols covering her body moved slowly like living energy flowing through invisible veins. Elias knelt beside her immediately, worried her fever had returned. But this felt different. The air inside the room suddenly vibrated with strange low sounds, almost like distant machines awakening somewhere underground. Mara stared at the glowing marks with growing fear. She had seen many alien species before, but never anything like this. Then Lyra spoke words neither of them understood. Her voice sounded deeper somehow, almost layered with another voice hidden beneath her own. Strange symbols flashed briefly across the walls around them, before disappearing again. Elias watched helplessly while the child trembled violently. After several painful seconds, the glowing light finally faded, and Lyra collapsed weakly against him. She looked exhausted and frightened by what had just happened. "Sorry," she whispered quietly. "Lyra cannot stop it anymore." Before Elias could ask what she meant, a new voice suddenly echoed from the darkness outside the room. "She is activating faster than expected." The hidden door slowly opened and an old alien stepped carefully inside. He wore torn gray robes and leaned heavily on a metal walking staff. Deep scars covered one side of his face, while mechanical implants replaced part of his left eye. Mara immediately aimed her rifle at him, but the old alien calmly raised both hands. His single glowing eye locked onto Lyra the moment he saw her. Then, to Elias's shock, the old stranger slowly dropped to one knee before the child. "The last starborn survives," he whispered softly. Elias demanded answers immediately. The old alien introduced himself as Vareth, one of the few surviving refugees from Lyra's destroyed civilization. According to him, her species once protected ancient technology far older than both humans and modern galactic empires. They were not conquerors or soldiers. They were guardians. But many powerful governments became obsessed with the ancient machines hidden under their protection. Wars began. Entire worlds burned searching for that power. Vareth explained that Lyra's people were hunted almost to extinction. Years ago, several empires joined together secretly to destroy the starborn civilization completely. Millions died during the attacks. Lyra's parents tried escaping with her before their homeworld collapsed, but enemy forces intercepted their ship near the outer colonies. Somehow Lyra survived alone while everyone else disappeared. The hunters chasing her now worked for Helix Corporation, a powerful military company searching for ancient alien weapons hidden somewhere beyond known space. Elias listened silently while the truth slowly became more terrifying. The symbols on her body, Elias finally asked carefully. What are they? Vareth's expression darkened immediately. He looked toward Lyra with both sadness and fear before answering. They are not tattoos, he said quietly. They are a living key. According to him, the glowing marks connected directly to an ancient station hidden somewhere in the galaxy, a machine powerful enough to destroy entire star systems if activated incorrectly. Only starborn blood could unlock it. That was why Helix hunted Lyra so relentlessly. To them, she was not a child. She was a weapon. Tears slowly filled Lyra's silver eyes as she lowered her head. Everyone dies because of Lyra, she whispered painfully. Mama died. Home died. People always die. Her small voice cracked under the weight of guilt no child should ever carry. Elias looked at her trembling body and suddenly understood why she expected hatred from everyone around her. Everywhere she went, destruction followed behind. Yet despite all that pain, she was still only a frightened little girl trying desperately to survive. Elias gently placed a hand on her shoulder. None of this is your fault, he said firmly. For several seconds, Lyra simply stared at him silently, almost unable to believe his words. Then distant explosions suddenly shook the station again. Dust rained from the ceiling while screams echoed through nearby tunnels. Mara rushed toward the door and looked outside before turning back, pale-faced. We have a serious problem, she warned urgently. The hunters aren't alone anymore. Moments later, every old screen inside the station flickered to life. A tall man wearing black military armor appeared across the displays. Cold silver eyes stared directly into the camera while flames burned behind him somewhere above the city. His calm expression carried no emotion whatsoever. This is Director Caney of Helix Corporation, the man announced coldly. Return the starborn child immediately, or New Carthage City will be erased before sunrise.